The morning sun hung low over the Texas plains, casting long shadows across the parched earth. Jacob Thornton had been riding since before dawn, his horse's steady rhythm, the only sound breaking the vast silence of the frontier. He was a rancher, weathered by 3 hard years of life on the border between civilization and wilderness, where a man's word meant everything and his reputation even more. The lines on his face told stories of drought and plenty, of losses that cut deep and small victories that sustained him through the lean times. His ranch, the Broken Spur, sat 20 miles north of the Rio Grande. A modest spread where he raised horses, known throughout 3 counties for their strength and gentle temperament. But his best mare had gone lame last month, and he needed a replacement before the autumn cattle drive. That's what brought him to the Carmichael Place on this scorching August morning. The Carmichael Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, buildings shimmering in the heat. Jacob had heard about old Samuel Carmichael's horses, bred from Spanish stock with bloodlines going back generations. The ranch itself looked prosperous from a distance, but as Jacob drew closer, he noticed the signs of neglect. Fences sagged in places, paint peeled from the barn, and the coral posts leaned at odd angles. It spoke of a place that had known better days, of dreams slowly crumbling under the weight of circumstance. Jacob had seen it before, the slow decay that happened when a man lost his way or his will, when the frontier took more than it gave. He dismounted near the main house, a sturdy adobe structure with a wide porch that offered shade from the relentless sun. Before he could knock, the door swung open, and Samuel Carmichael stepped out. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, but there was something in his eyes that made Jacob's hand instinctively move closer to the revolver at his hip. Carmichael's eyes were cold, empty of the warmth that usually accompanied frontier hospitality. His face bore the ruddiness of a heavy drinker, and his clothes, though once fine, showed the stains and wrinkles of someone who had given up caring about appearances. "You Thornton." Carmichael's voice was rough, hostile even in greeting. "I am. Came about the horses you're selling. Heard you've got good stock." Jacob kept his tone neutral, professional. Something about this place set his teeth on edge, but he'd come a long way, and he needed that mare. "Got horses, all right. Best in the territory." Carmichael spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Come on, then. They're out back." Jacob followed the man around the house toward the corrals. As they walked, he noticed more details that troubled him. The ranch hands he saw looked away quickly, their faces closed and fearful. The place had an atmosphere of oppression, of violence barely contained. He'd known men like Carmichael before, men who ruled their little kingdoms with cruelty, who took out their failures on anything weaker than themselves. The horses were magnificent, though. In a large corral stood 7 or 8 animals, their coats gleaming despite the dust. They were indeed Spanish stock, with the fine heads and strong legs that made them perfect for ranch work. Jacob's eye was immediately drawn to a chestnut mare, with a white blaze down her face. She was perfect, exactly what he needed. He could already imagine her running the range, helping him manage his herd. "That one," Jacob said, pointing. "The chestnut." "What are you asking?" Carmichael named a price that was steep but fair. They began the dance of negotiation, each man feeling out the other, looking for advantages and weaknesses. It was during this back and forth that Jacob first saw her. She emerged from a small shed near the corral, carrying a heavy bucket of water. She couldn't have been more than 17, with dark hair pulled back from a face that would have been pretty if not for the bruises. A purple mark colored her left cheek, and her lip was split and swollen. But it was her eyes that struck Jacob most forcefully. They held a combination of fear and defiance, of someone who had been beaten down but not broken, not entirely. She wore a simple dress, torn at the shoulder, and around her waist was a rope, tied cruelly tight, the other end trailing behind her like a leash. Jacob's blood ran cold. He'd seen many hard things on the frontier, had witnessed cruelty and injustice, but this struck him with particular force. The girl moved with the careful precision of someone who knew that any mistake would bring punishment. She carried the water to a trough, her movements mechanical, then turned to go back. As she passed near where Jacob and Carmichael stood, her eyes met his for just a moment, and he saw in them a desperate plea, a silent scream for help. "Who's that?" Jacob asked, trying to keep his voice casual, though his heart was pounding. "The girl." Carmichael barely glanced at her. "That's my daughter. Or was. She's nothing now. Caused me trouble, disrespected me in front of the hands. I've been teaching her proper behavior." He said it without shame, without any sense that his words should horrify a decent man. Jacob felt rage building in his chest, but he forced it down. He'd learned long ago that anger without strategy was worse than useless. "Seems a harsh lesson," he said carefully. Carmichael's eyes narrowed. "A man's got a right to manage his own household. You got a problem with that? We got no business." Jacob held up his hands in a placating gesture. "No problem. Just making conversation." But his mind was racing. He couldn't leave the girl here. Every instinct he possessed, everything he believed about right and wrong, demanded that he do something. But what? He couldn't just take her. Carmichael would shoot him dead before he got 10 feet. And even if he survived, he'd be wanted for kidnapping or worse. The law on the frontier was uneven at best. And in these parts, a father's rights over his children were considered nearly absolute. They went back to negotiating over the horse, but Jacob's attention kept drifting to the girl. She had gone back into the shed, but he could see her through the open door, sitting on the ground, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The rope around her waist was tied to a post inside the shed. She was literally bound like an animal. Jacob made his decision. He would buy the horse, and somehow he would find a way to help her. He didn't know how yet, but he couldn't ride away and leave her in this hell. It would haunt him for the rest of his days, would poison every moment of peace he might otherwise find. They settled on a price for the mare. Carmichael wanted payment immediately, and Jacob had brought gold coins for just this purpose. As he counted out the money, he said, as casually as he could manage, "I could use some help getting her back to my place. 20 miles is a fair distance to lead a new horse. You got a hand you could spare for a day or two?" "I'd pay extra for the help." Carmichael considered this, greed warring with suspicion in his eyes. "I got hands, but they're busy with other work." "What about the girl?" The words came out before Jacob had fully thought them through. But once spoken, he committed to them. "She could lead the horse. I'd pay for her time, and you'd have her back tomorrow evening." Carmichael laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You want to take her? Mister, you don't know what you're asking for. That girl is trouble, pure and simple. Stubborn, disobedient, got ideas above her station. Still, for leading a horse, how much trouble can she be? I'll give you $10, on top of the horse's price. That's good money for a day's work." The greed won. Jacob could see it in Carmichael's eyes, the way they lit up at the thought of extra gold. $10 was a fortune for a day's simple labor, and they both knew it. Carmichael was probably already calculating how many bottles of whiskey that would buy. "All right," Carmichael said slowly. "But she comes back tomorrow by sundown, you understand. And if she gives you any trouble, you bring her back immediately. I won't have her running off." "Understood," Jacob said, his heart beating faster. He had bought himself time, bought the girl a chance, though he still didn't know exactly what he was going to do with it. Carmichael called out harshly, and the girl emerged from the shed, moving quickly, her eyes downcast. "You're going with this man?" Carmichael told her. "Going to help him lead a horse to his ranch. You'll do exactly what he says. And you'll be back here tomorrow by dark. You understand me?" The girl nodded, not speaking, not looking up. But Jacob saw her hands trembling. "And if you try anything at all, you know what happens when you get back." Carmichael's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "You know what I'll do." She nodded again, and Jacob saw a tear slide down her cheek. Carmichael untied the rope from the post but left it around her waist, handing the end to Jacob like he was transferring ownership of livestock. The humiliation of it, the casual cruelty, made Jacob want to plant his fist in the man's face. But he took the rope, coiled it loosely in his hand, and turned toward his horse. The process of transferring the mare took another 20 minutes. Jacob saddled her, tested her gait, made sure she was sound. All the while, the girl stood silent, her head down, not moving unless told to. When everything was ready, Jacob mounted his own horse and gestured for the girl to lead the mare. They rode away from the Carmichael ranch in silence. Jacob kept them at a steady pace, not too fast, not pushing. He wanted to get away from that place, but he also needed to think. The girl walked beside the mare, holding the lead rope with one hand. The other hand occasionally touched her swollen lip, or the bruise on her face, gentle touches, as if she was still processing the pain. They had been traveling for perhaps half an hour, the Carmichael ranch long out of sight behind them, when Jacob finally spoke. "What's your name?" The girl looked up startled, as if she hadn't expected to be addressed as a human being. Her eyes were a deep brown, he noticed, intelligent and watchful. "Sarah," she said softly. "Sarah Carmichael. I'm Jacob Thornton. I own the Broken Spur Ranch about 15 miles ahead." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I didn't buy that horse because I needed a horse. I mean, I do need one, but that's not why I paid your father's price. I did it so I could get you out of there." She stopped walking, stood very still. Her face showed confusion, then a flicker of hope so desperate it was painful to see. Then fear. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not taking you back there tomorrow. I'm not taking you back ever, if you don't want to go." Sarah's breath caught. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He'll kill you. If you don't bring me back, he'll come after you, and he'll kill you." "Maybe he'll try," Jacob said calmly. "But I've dealt with hard men before, and some things are worth the risk." "Why?" The word burst from her with unexpected force. "Why would you risk anything for me? You don't know me. I'm nothing, nobody. That's what he's always told me. I'm worthless, a burden, a disappointment." Jacob stopped his horse and looked down at her. "Sarah, your father is a liar. You're not worthless. You're a human being, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. What he's done to you, what he's been doing to you, it's wrong. It's evil. And I'm not the kind of man who can look at evil and just ride away." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she seemed unaware of them. "I prayed," she whispered. "Every night for the last year since my mother died, I prayed that someone would come, that someone would help me. I prayed until I stopped believing anyone was listening. And then today, when I saw you, when I looked in your eyes, I thought maybe there was still hope. But I was afraid to hope, afraid it would hurt worse when you left me there." "I'm not leaving you there," Jacob said firmly. "Now come on. We need to keep moving. We need to get to my ranch, and then we need to figure out our next steps." They traveled through the afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly. Sarah walked the whole way, refusing Jacob's offer to ride the mare. She said she was used to walking, that it felt strange to think of riding when she'd spent so long being treated like an animal herself. As they traveled, she began to talk, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, as if words long dammed up were finally breaking free. She told him about her mother, a gentle woman who had tried to shield Sarah from her father's increasing violence. About how the drinking had gotten worse over the years, how Samuel Carmichael had once been a different man, or so her mother had claimed. About the day 6 months ago when her mother had died of fever, and how something in Carmichael had broken completely after that. How he blamed Sarah, said she hadn't taken good enough care of her mother, said she was a constant reminder of what he'd lost. How the beatings had gotten worse, more frequent, until finally, 3 weeks ago, when she tried to run away and been caught by one of the ranch hands, Carmichael had tied the rope around her waist and announced she would stay bound until she learned her place. Jacob listened, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the reins so hard his knuckles went white. Every word she spoke added another layer to his understanding of the hell she'd been living in, and his determination to protect her hardened into something like steel in his chest. They reached the Broken Spur as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Jacob's ranch was smaller than Carmichael's but well maintained, the buildings sturdy and cared for. Sarah looked around with something like wonder, as if she'd forgotten that places could look like this, could feel peaceful instead of threatening. Jacob's foreman, a grizzled Mexican man named Miguel, who had worked the ranch for 20 years, came out to meet them. He took one look at Sarah, at the rope still tied around her waist, at her bruised face, and his expression darkened. "Patron," he said quietly, "what have you brought home?" "Trouble, probably," Jacob admitted. "Miguel, this is Sarah. She's going to be staying with us for a while. I need you to ride over to the Weatherby place, ask Mrs. Weatherby if she'll come stay here for a few days. Sarah needs a woman's presence, needs someone to help her." Miguel nodded slowly. "And the man who did this to her, he will come looking. Tomorrow, most likely. We need to be ready." "We will be ready," Miguel said simply, and Jacob knew he meant it. Miguel had been with him through droughts and floods, through Comanche raids and cattle thieves. If it came to violence, Miguel would stand with him. After Miguel rode off, Jacob led Sarah into the ranch house. It was a simple place, comfortable but not fancy, a bachelor's home that showed the lack of a woman's touch. He took her to the spare bedroom, a small but clean space with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "You can stay here," he said. "You're safe now, Sarah. I promise you that." She stood in the doorway, staring at the room as if it was something from a dream. Then, slowly, she reached down and began trying to untee the rope around her waist. Her fingers fumbled with the knot, and Jacob realized it had been pulled so tight, for so long, that it wouldn't come loose easily. "Here, let me," he said gently. He pulled out his knife, and Sarah flinched back instinctively, her eyes wide with fear. "It's all right," Jacob said softly. "I'm just going to cut the rope. I'm not going to hurt you." She stood very still as he carefully slid the knife under the rope and cut through it. The rope fell away, leaving a red welt around her waist where it had bitten into her skin. Sarah looked down at herself, at the mark the rope had left, and something seemed to break inside her. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing great heaving cries that shook her whole body. Jacob knelt beside her, not touching her but just being present. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe now. You're going to be all right." When the storm of tears finally subsided, Sarah looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "When my father comes tomorrow, what happens?" "Tomorrow, we tell him the truth," Jacob said. "We tell him you're not going back. That if he wants to make trouble, he'll have to go through me first. And won't just let me go. He'll say I'm his property, his daughter, that he has rights. And I'll say that no man has the right to treat another human being the way he treated you. That some things are more important than law, more important than custom." Sarah shook her head. "You could die for this. You could lose everything. Maybe," Jacob acknowledged. "But I'd lose more if I let you go back. I'd lose the part of myself that I value most. The part that believes in doing what's right, even when it's hard." That night Jacob slept little. He sat on his porch, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness and thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Mrs. Weatherby, a widow who ran a small farm nearby, had arrived late in the evening, brought by Miguel. She had taken one look at Sarah, and immediately enfolded her in a motherly embrace, clucking over her injuries and leading her away to tend to her properly. Jacob was grateful for her presence, grateful that Sarah would have someone to talk to, someone to help her begin healing from the trauma she'd endured. The dawn came slow and red, and with it came Samuel Carmichael. He arrived mid-morning with 4 men, ranch hands who looked uncomfortable but determined. Carmichael himself looked like fury incarnate, his face purple with rage. Jacob was waiting for him in front of the ranch house, Miguel and 2 other hands standing behind him. Mrs. Weatherby had taken Sarah inside and barricaded the door, with instructions not to come out no matter what happened. "Where is she?" Carmichael roared as soon as he was within shouting distance. "Where's my daughter, Thornton?" "She's here," Jacob said calmly. "She's safe. Safe. She's my daughter. You got no right to keep her? And you got no right to treat her the way you did," Jacob replied, his voice hard. "I saw the bruises. Carmichael, I saw the rope around her waist. I saw how she flinched away like a beaten dog. That's not how a father treats his child. How I treat my own is none of your damned business. Carmichael's hand moved toward his gun. I'm making it my business, Jacob said. He hadn't drawn his weapon, but his hand rested near it ready. She's not going back with you. She's staying here, under my protection. The hell she is! I'll have the law on you for this! Kidnapping interference. Go ahead, Jacob interrupted. Ride into town. Tell the sheriff what happened. Tell him how you kept your daughter tied up like an animal. Tell him about the beatings. See how sympathetic he is to your cause. Carmichael's face twisted with rage and something else. Fear, Jacob realized. Because Carmichael knew that if this became public, if people learned the full extent of what he'd done, he would lose what little reputation he had left. The frontier had hard rules, but one of them was that you protected women, you protected children. Men who violated that code became outcasts. You don't understand, Carmichael said, his voice dropping to something almost pleading. She's all I got left. Since her mother died, she's all that's left of her. Then you should have treated her better, Jacob said quietly. You should have loved her, not beaten her. You should have protected her, not bound her. You failed her, Carmichael. And now you need to let her go. I can't, Carmichael whispered. I can't lose her too. You already lost her, Jacob said. The moment you tied that rope around her waist, you lost her. The only question now is whether you walk away with some dignity, or whether this gets ugly. The two men stared at each other across the dusty yard. Carmichael's hands were shaking, and Jacob couldn't tell if it was from rage or grief, or the need for drink. Behind Carmichael, his ranch hands were looking increasingly uncomfortable, clearly not eager for a fight. Finally, Carmichael spoke, his voice broken. Can I at least see her? Can I at least say goodbye? Jacob considered this. It could be a trick, a way to get inside the house. But he also saw something genuine in Carmichael's face. Something lost and desperate. He made a decision that he hoped he wouldn't regret. Wait here, Jacob said. He went inside, where Sarah was standing by the window, her face pale. He wants to say goodbye, Jacob told her. You don't have to if you don't want to. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'll see him. But only with you there. They went outside together. Sarah stood on the porch, Jacob beside her, Mrs. Weatherby just inside the door. Carmichael took a few steps forward, and Sarah tensed. But she didn't run. Sarah, Carmichael said, and his voice was different now, stripped of its usual harshness. I'm sorry. I know that don't mean much now, but I am. Your mother, she would hate what I've become. She would hate what I did to you. Sarah said nothing, just watched him with careful eyes. I loved her so much, Carmichael continued. When she died, I felt like I died too. And I blamed you, blamed everyone, because I couldn't accept that sometimes people just die, that sometimes there's nothing to be done. I took it out on you, and that was wrong. I know it was wrong. It was more than wrong, Sarah said softly. It was evil. Carmichael flinched as if she'd struck him. Yeah, he said after a moment. Yeah, it was. He looked at Jacob. You'll take care of her. You'll make sure she's all right? I will, Jacob promised. Carmichael nodded slowly. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. This was your mother's, he said to Sarah. Jewelry, some money. It's yours by right. I was saving it, but you should have it now. He set the bundle on the porch steps, then turned and walked back to his horse. His men followed, and within moments they were riding away, a cloud of dust marking their passage across the prairie. Sarah watched them go, her expression unreadable. When they were out of sight, she turned to Jacob. Do you think he meant it? The apology. I think he did, Jacob said. But meaning it and changing are two different things. Some people, the damage goes too deep. They can't come back from what they've become. Sarah nodded slowly. She picked up the bundle her father had left, held it in her hands. What happens to me now? She asked. I can't stay here forever. People will talk. People always talk, Mrs. Weatherby said from the doorway. But I've got a thought on that, if you'll hear me out. They all looked at her, and she smiled. My sister runs a boarding school for young ladies back in San Antonio. Good place, respectable. They teach reading, writing, proper skills for making a living. I could write to her, see about getting Sarah a place there. Give her a chance to learn, to build a life for herself. A school. Sarah's voice was full of wonder. I always wanted to learn to read properly. My mother taught me some, but then she got sick, and after that. Then that's what we'll do, Jacob said. You'll stay here until we can arrange things with Mrs. Weatherby's sister. And when you go to that school, you'll have what your father gave you, and you'll have money from me as well, enough to see you through. I can't take your money, Sarah protested. You can and you will, Jacob said firmly. Consider it payment for helping me see what kind of man I want to be. You've reminded me why I came to this country in the first place, what values I wanted to live by. That's worth more than gold. Sarah stayed at the Broken Spur for 6 weeks while the arrangements were made. In that time, Jacob watched her transform. With good food, rest, and kindness, the frightened, beaten creature he'd first seen began to disappear. In her place emerged a young woman of remarkable strength and intelligence. She helped around the ranch, learning to care for the horses, to mend tack, to do 100 small tasks that needed doing. She laughed sometimes, a sound that made everyone smile. She began to dream again, to talk about the future with hope instead of fear. Mrs. Weatherby's sister wrote back with an acceptance. There was a place for Sarah at the school, starting in the fall term. Jacob arranged for her passage, bought her proper clothes, gave her enough money to live comfortably for 2 years. Miguel's wife taught her additional skills, preparing her for the journey ahead. The day Sarah left, the whole ranch turned out to see her off. She was traveling with a family heading east, good people who would see her safely to San Antonio. She stood by the wagon, dressed in a simple but respectable traveling outfit, her few possessions packed in a small trunk. She hugged Mrs. Weatherby, thanked Miguel and the other hands. Then she turned to Jacob. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You saved my life. More than that, you gave me back my life, gave me a future. You saved yourself, Jacob replied. I just gave you a chance. What you do with it, that's all you. I'll make you proud, she promised. I'll work hard, I'll learn everything I can, and someday I'll find a way to help other people the way you helped me. I'm already proud, Jacob said. No, go on. Go build that life you deserve. He watched the wagon roll away, carrying Sarah toward a future that was bright with possibility. As the dust settled, Miguel came to stand beside him. You did a good thing, patron, the old foreman said. A hard thing, but a good thing. Just did what needed doing, Jacob replied. But he felt changed by it all, felt like he'd faced a test and passed it, like he'd proven to himself that the values he claimed to hold weren't just words, but something real, something worth sacrifice. 3 years later, Jacob received a letter. It was from Sarah, written in a clear, confident hand that spoke of education and growth. She had graduated from the boarding school and was now working as a teacher herself, helping young girls learn to read and write. She had met a young lawyer, a good man who treated her with respect and kindness. They were planning to marry in the spring. But I wanted you to know, she wrote, that I think of you often, and with such gratitude. You showed me that there are still good men in this world, men who will stand up against evil even when it costs them. You taught me that one person's courage can change everything, can take a life that seemed destined for tragedy and turn it toward hope. I'm happy now, truly happy, and it's because of you. Because you saw me when I was invisible, because you valued me when I was told I was worthless, because you acted when you could have simply ridden away. Thank you, Jacob Thornton, for giving me back my life. Jacob read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. Outside, the sun was setting over the prairie, painting the land in shades of gold and crimson. He thought about that day 3 years ago, about the choice he'd made, about the risk he'd taken. It could have gone so differently. Carmichael could have fought, people could have died, the law could have come down against him. But none of that had happened. Instead, a young woman who had been drowning in darkness had found her way to light, and in helping her, he had found something too, a confirmation that the man he wanted to be and the man he actually was could be one and the same. The frontier was a hard place, full of violence and loss, where justice was uncertain and mercy often seemed like weakness. But it was also a place where a single act of courage could ripple outward, where one person's decision to do right could change the course of a life, could plant seeds that would grow into something beautiful and strong. Jacob walked back into his ranch house as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new choices to be made. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of peace, of satisfaction, knowing that when it had mattered most, when a desperate girl had whispered her plea, he had listened. He had acted. He had chosen mercy over profit, compassion over caution, and in doing so, he had proven that even in the wildest places, even in the hardest times, the human capacity for goodness could still prevail. That was worth more than all the gold in California, more than all the land in Texas. It was the only wealth that truly mattered, the only legacy worth leaving behind. The story of what happened that day eventually spread through the territory, told and retold in saloons and around campfires. Some details changed in the telling, became exaggerated or simplified, but the heart of it remained the same. A rancher had come to buy a horse, and instead had bought a young woman her freedom. It became the kind of story the frontier needed, a reminder that in a land often ruled by violence and greed, there was still room for honor, still space for heroism of the quiet kind. Jacob never sought recognition for what he'd done. He went back to his life, raising horses, managing his ranch, living according to the code he'd always tried to follow. But Sarah's letter remained in his pocket, close to his heart, a reminder of why that code mattered, of what it could accomplish when one person decided that doing right was worth any cost. And on clear nights, when he sat on his porch and looked out over the vast darkness of the prairie, he thought about that girl walking beside a horse, bound by rope but not broken, and how she had whispered words that changed both their lives forever. Take me, not the horse. A desperate plea that became a challenge, a test of character, a call to be better than the world expected. He had answered that call, and in the answering, he had found what every man searches for in the wild places of the earth, a purpose larger than himself, a meaning deeper than survival, a reason to believe that individual choices matter, that single acts of courage can push back against the darkness, that mercy, when given freely, returns to bless both the giver and receiver. The frontier would take much from Jacob Thornton in the years to come. It would wear him down with droughts and hard winters, would take friends and fortune. But it could never take away what he'd earned that day, could never diminish the knowledge that when faced with evil, he had not turned away. He had stood firm. He had chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. And somewhere, in a schoolhouse in San Antonio, a young woman taught children to read, loved a good man, and remembered the rancher who had seen her worth when no one else would, who had given her back her life and her future. That remembrance, that gratitude, that changed life. Those were the things that mattered, the things that lasted, the things that made the struggle of frontier existence worthwhile. As the years passed and became history, as the wild frontier slowly gave way to civilization, the story remained, passed down through generations. It became more than just a tale of one man's courage. It became a testament to the enduring power of human compassion, proof that even in the hardest places, even in the darkest times, there were still those who would stand for what was right, still those who understood that a life had value beyond measure. That freedom was worth fighting for, that mercy was the truest form of strength, and in that way, Jacob Thornton's legacy lived on, not in monuments or wealth, but in the lives he'd touched, in the example he'd set, in the reminder he'd left behind that we are all called, in our own moments, to be better than we think we can be, to do more than we believe we should, to see the worth in others, even when the world says they have none. The dust of that long-ago morning had long since settled, but the impact of what happened there continued to echo forward through time. A ripple of goodness in a harsh world, a light against the dark, a story of redemption and hope that would never truly end.